Hello to our New Zealand listeners. Powrsuit is coming to a city near you. If you're in Wellington, Christchurch or Auckland, we've specially designed a 4-week program to help you bust through those beliefs and habits that are holding you back. Come and join some of our very first leadership cohorts in June and July. We even have an email template to help you get professional development budget. So reach out at hello@powrsuit.com and we look forward to meeting you in person. Welcome to Powrup, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts Nat and Kristen as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Hello, thanks for listening. Today we're chatting about saying no in the workplace without the guilt.
This is all part of our mission to give you the tools and confidence to build your career on your terms. Are you a yes or a no person, Kristen?
I think I'm a yes person. I would love to think I'm a no person. So this podcast, I'm going to go back and listen to it once I record it. But I think I am a yes person. I like to help people. I think it probably is part of my superpowers is is to be helpful and to add value. But the problem for me is where to draw the line.
I agree. I feel very similar. And I like some of the quotes that we found this week thinking about this around what you say no to is actually some of the most important stuff. And it's the same with business as well. And I know in the startup community, that idea of you're always going to have 5 million opportunities. And the actual key to strategy is what you say no to rather than what you say yes to. So I feel like both of us are quite good at that from a building a business point of view, but maybe personally less good at that. And we maybe say yes a bit too much a lot of the time.
Well, the biggest thing I'm getting nowadays is I'll go to a talk or, we're getting out and about as part of Powrsuit, and you always get people coming up to you and saying, oh, I'd love to pick your brain on this, or I'd love to do this. And that is great, by the way. We do love it. But I have now found my calendar really full and of coffees. And so I'm trying to do little tactics like 15-minute video calls or because if you're just going downtown to have a coffee with someone, it can be, then you kind of get that frustration thing as opposed to, oh, I'm doing this because I want to add value to someone else. And it's a win-win.
And I was talking to a friend about this the other day because she was really frustrated with the situation she was in. And I was like, this is really interesting because you actually should have said no to that because you were frustrated because you didn't want to do it, but you did it. And then they didn't feel as indebted to you as you expected them to feel. And I was like, this is exactly the situation. I could spot it because I do it all the time, where you've put a whole bunch of emotions on someone else, but actually it's our jobs to know when to say no to things.
So true.
And a great analogy that I learned years ago, right at the start of Hatch, was that idea of the china plates, that you are always juggling all these plates, and some of them are Kmart china, and some of us love Kmart china, but it's very cheap. And then the other stuff is this really beautiful fancy porcelain china, and if you're just juggling everything madly, you'll drop any of those plates, and you don't want to drop the fancy china. So learning how to put down your Kmart china and say no to it is the way you can keep all the really important stuff in the air, which I like. It's such a nice mental image for me to remember
great.
how to,
I love that
when
one.
to say no.
I love that one. I have episode 18 chatter in my notes here, Nat, and I just, for some weird reason, I wanted to make homage to our 18 episodes in. 6 months ago, we didn't even know we were going to be doing a podcast.
How are we meant to do this with like a round number or something?
No, 18 felt right for me. Now, someone who hasn't stuck to something or just, is taking a punt wouldn't do it 18 times.
Well, don't most podcasts finish it before 19 episodes? Is that what you're alluding to?
I'm just saying 18 feels good, and we should just take a minute to celebrate that we've done this 18 times, and we've got lots more to come.
Well, we've been perfect for the last 8 times, according to your rules. We also actually passed 6 months of newsletter a couple of weeks ago.
Wow.
I think we've sent the 30th newsletter is this week.
Oh, well,
so we're half a year in, but I
celebration.
missed it because I don't want to say I'm bad at maths because that is something that women say all too often, but I couldn't divide 52 by 2 off the top of my head, so I just never figured out which one was 6 months. I can do that, by the way. It's 26.
It is 26.
26.
Good on you.
Well, congratulations to us.
Yes, yay us. We're having a party.
This is probably a good time to ask people to send through your feedback, to say if we're still hitting the mark going into our next 18 episodes.
Yes.
Is this working for you? Is there anything you'd like more of, less of? We've changed up the format quite a lot in the last 18 weeks, and we are open to changing it more. So we'd love to hear. hello@powrsuit.com.
Yay, thank you. Okay, so we are chatting. Let's get into our no's. We're going to chat why you might say no, when to say no, and how to say no, because it's really hard and it is an art to be mastered. So that's what we're going to dig into. So why might you say no? Let's tackle the first one, which is number one.
When it's unnecessary.
Unnecessary. I love that.
When the thing, and this could just be at work or outside of work, when it's unnecessary, and you know it's unnecessary.
Yeah, no. I found early in my career, I ended up, for some reason, working for C-suite very, very early on in my career. So my boss always had a C in front of their title, or VP, which is similar in North America. And you will be in a meeting or something will happen and it will trigger something, an idea in their brains where they're like, we got to do this or we have to do this. And I learned very quickly what was make work work. And that's
absolutely.
And I knew when I got passed down, I was like, I'm going to do a little experiment here, because I knew it was unnecessary. Whatever, that was my judgment, but it was what it was. And the little experiment was, I bet you they're not even going to remember giving me this task or this piece of work. And so I learned when not to do the thing. Sure enough, it never came up again. But can you imagine the stress had I taken that on? So
it's fascinating.
I know. I had a little radar of make work work, I called it. And I'm like, that was a shit. That was unnecessary.
Well, one of the easiest ways to catch that in a meeting, because there's a couple of things from a leadership perspective to dig in there. From a meeting perspective, it's to say, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
And if no one can articulate the value we're getting out of it, it's a really easy way to shut it down without being...
But that's hard to shut down a C-suite person when...
Absolutely. That's
I'm
true.
like, ignore. No.
Just ignore. But the other thing is, it really points to some of those critical leadership skills that all of us need to stay across. We have a lot of unconscious biases, but we also have a lot of unconscious habits, and all of us get these pet projects. And when we've worked together in the past at Hatch, we actually openly acknowledged when we were doing unnecessary things, and we called them our pet projects, when we were like, this is actually in amongst some of the really hard stuff you have to do. It's really nice to sometimes do something that's unnecessary but really fun.
Yeah, that's
What's
true.
not cool is when you talk aloud and pass it over to someone, and now you've effectively, as a leader, derailed a bunch of people in your team who could be doing more important stuff, which is a really bad habit to set up in an organization, and it leads to chaos pretty quickly. So yes, absolutely, when it's unnecessary, you should say no.
Number 2 is scope creep. I'm going to let you take this because you're good at smashing this
well
one.
In product, it's a thing.
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, it's the same with anything, and most of us will probably recognize it. You get something quite simple to do. We're just going to do the smallest thing. And then you do the smallest thing and you're like, ooh, wouldn't it be nice if we added a really nice graphic to this? Oh, maybe we could do a photo shoot. Oh, what about if we also put it over on this channel? Or what if we made it like this? And often this is really interesting because it comes out of this incredible engaged motivation, which is a great thing to have when you're working. But one of the other factors of it, which we've talked about in other podcasts, is when you actually don't have that cross-business understanding. So it's very easy if you're sitting as a designer to go, oh, why don't we just add another button? But you actually don't understand what work goes into adding another button. Or if you're writing a document, what work goes into editing it or formatting it. And so having that understanding of working across a business, you're probably less likely to do this. But scope creep is another bad habit that all of us have, right?
Yeah,
like,
because we just want everything.
You want everything. You see it nice. You see it looking nice, and you want it nicer. And I think the same question goes: is why are we doing this? And if there's no actual added value, we should absolutely say no to it.
Yeah, shut it down. Love that. The third is saying yes can kill your productivity. I love to think that we can do it all, but we can't. And if we want to be really successful in our role and as leaders, I think less is more quality work, less quantity work. So that's where we have to get really picky and choose the things that really move the needle, that matter. Because if we think we can spread ourselves thin across all sorts of bunches of everything, the really important things suffer. And then as a result, our work suffers, and that's not great for our reputation. So I just think it's this like, it can kill productivity.
Absolutely. We should actually do a newsletter on this soon and a podcast on very simple matrix of effort and reward.
Yeah.
And that's a really nice way to figure out how to decide what's productive and what's not, because it's actually productivity is quite hard to measure. The fourth one is to prevent burnout. And as someone who has just come back from 2 weeks holiday in Bali, who is not burnt out at all, it is a real risk. And I've spoken to a few people, like fortunately when I went on holiday, I wasn't burning out. One of the tools in my tool belt now to avoid that is to take holidays. But when you have too many things on, I'm trying to think of an analogy for this, but it almost you grind to a halt, right? Like everyone's seen those times where you just have way too much on your to-do list and therefore you don't start on any of it. So it actually becomes a self-perpetuating thing where rather than just breaking it down to one thing after another, you've just got so much on, you're overwhelmed, you're overloaded. And the way you say no often in that is to outsource. So we can talk a little bit about that, of what stuff is in your superpowers and things you should do, and what's the stuff you actually don't want to do. And that could be at home as well, because our home lives do impact our work lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think burnout is at all-time highs, actually. There's a study out across a global study, and 47% of women in the workplace identify as burning out, which isn't great. So timely podcast outsourcing is critical. There's that delegation in there, getting good at that. We do have an article on that. It'll be in the resources in this podcast.
And I think one of the things we need to dispel that myth about burnout is often an affliction of high achievers because they are going above and beyond, but it's actually not a criteria of being a high achiever. And I think it's really easy to fall into that trap of, I'm going to work harder. I've been there. This is why I'm talking about it. I can work harder, smarter, faster than everyone else. Whereas actually with some of these tools we talk about at Powrsuit, you can actually avoid ever getting into that trap. And one of the big ones is saying no.
Absolutely. I remember my mum was visiting, I think it was a couple years ago, and it was pretty hectic, and we were in growth period in our last business. And I just remember her seeing me cleaning on a Sunday, and she just said, "Why are you doing this? This is the stuff you have to get off your plate. Just something I could be better spent time with my family or time, doing other things." So.
And I think a lot of us who've grown up in households where having a cleaner or having a nanny is like such a luxury. The world has changed. Like most of us grew up you grew up in a different household to mine, but my mum was able to stay at home. So while I she had an incredibly difficult job, but running the household and all the different stuff she did, you don't have that same ability. And I think the other thing that I've learned is we sort of have this people with cleaners and people without. A lot of these measures can be short term. You could hire a cleaner for a month and just get through a busy patch and just remove some stuff from your plate for a while.
Absolutely.
So when should we say no?
We should say no. Number one is when there's a better solution. And to your point earlier, when you're sitting in a meeting and someone hands down a task or a project, it's actually critically thinking and asking questions, first of all, really understanding what is it the thing that we're trying to do? What does success look like? And then identifying, is this the best solution? Because sometimes there's an easier way to go about it.
I agree.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be as complicated. It doesn't have to be this crazy big thing. It could be an Excel spreadsheet, for goodness sakes. But I think rather than going and building the gold-plated thing, which a lot of workplaces want to do, I understand that. Is there a really easy place just to get easy thing that we can do that can get us 90% there? That's probably good enough.
Well, and knowing where there is, you say, what does success look like? One of my pet lectures is we're all solutions people. People frame a problem or a success measure as a solution. So even with these power sessions we're doing, quite often when people talk about their biggest challenge, they will come in and say, I need to do X, Y, and Z. That's not a challenge. That's a potential solution. So understanding what you're trying to achieve, if that's not clear, then the solution that's come up with, who knows if it's the right thing to do. So there's always, in both of our experience, there is a million different ways to achieve what you need to achieve. But the first thing is figuring out what that is. And if that's not clear,
and
it's probably a good idea to say no.
We tend to overcomplicate these things, don't we? And let's assume that we're saying no so that we're not burnt out. We're saying no so therefore we're productive. That means that you can expend your energy on really critically thinking and thinking across the organization and strategically about the solution that's being asked, and just make sure that's the right one. So
absolutely.
That's a time to say no, is when there genuinely is a better solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think an example the other day we had, because I feel like sometimes people ask us for examples, is one of the tools this leadership team had was they could actually just ask their team what they felt about the culture at work. And so the solution put forward was, we're going to sign up to this email platform and we're going to do the survey and we're going to send it out. And it was this big project. And the other solution was, why don't you just send everyone an email with A, B, C and ask them to reply A, B, and C? Those are two very similar solutions. And I think that's the sort of thinking we're talking about, is what is the smallest thing you can do, or what is another way that you could cut the amount of time you spend on stuff and still achieve the same result.
Great.
The second time to say no is when it won't move you closer to where you want to go. And we've spoken, when we're talking about strategic yeses, about setting goals. And are you a goal setter?
In my head, yeah.
Yeah, I never considered myself one, but I realize I've always got goals, which I think we talked about at the time. And if you kind of know what you want to achieve, and I think public speaking is a good one. And I remember this incredible woman founder I spoke to years ago. She wanted to grow her organization. She wanted to grow the company. She was being offered speaking gigs left, right, and center. And so she just came up with some really simple criteria. If there wasn't more than 50 people in the room in her target market, it was a no. And so really understanding what your goals are and where you want to go gives you the ability to set some really simple criteria and know when is a good time to say no.
And the strategic yeses will be a link again in the resources of this podcast, because we did another podcast and an article on this. But it is all about, that goes back to my very first point with, is this work for work's sake? Like that, if you're getting a strategic piece of work that's going to move you closer to your goals and be impactful on the organization, and it is from a sponsor, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't do that, but it's just being able to really discern where that work lies, and is this the thing that gets you professionally closer to what you want to do, or even outside of work?
I think a really common one with that is meetings, where people are just inundated with meetings. One of the easiest places to practice this is to go, does this meeting take me closer to my strategic goals? Do I need to be there? Do I understand why? Say no.
Yeah.
You're allowed to question it.
Yeah.
And that's a really easy action for everyone to take this week.
Yes. The third is when it'll make you resentful and angry. And this is
my
Kristen
favorite.
Going, oh yes, let's meet for a coffee in town, knowing there are no parking spaces available. I'll be, driving around town for 10 minutes to find a spot, and then I'm paying $20 a minute for parking fees. This is making me resentful and angry. So I'm starting to master, can we just do a quick video call? I know we're in the same city. I recognize that, but would you mind if we just did that? Unless, of course, we're looking to genuinely hustle for Powrsuit and there's a benefit on the outside. I have to be a little bit ruthless at this point in our stage in our career, that if you know that you're saying yes to something that will sounds like an okay idea now, you've signed up to squash lessons or something because a friend has brought you into it, but when you're driving to squash lessons going, why the heck am I doing this, or whatever, it's making you resentful and angry, that's your no time.
Have you signed up to squash?
I loved squash as a kid. Bad on my knees though, so maybe that was a bad example.
But it's the same with me, and I do those future me things where I book like a 6 a.m. flight. I hate me for doing that.
Why? You're up all night worrying about missing your flight. Ugh. I hate you for doing that too.
But yes, that's a big one, and that's actually on us. The resentful and angry thing is no one else knows.
100%.
You've agreed to something. It's not on them.
I've said yes, but something in my gut is like, this is going to be a problem when it comes, but I've kicked the can down the road and it's a problem. Yeah.
And the last one is something that I think really closely ties to that concept of a growth mindset, is when you're busy. We're not necessarily always busy, and I've been through patches in the last year where we really weren't busy in this most delightful way. But when you're busy, you're not stuck in busy, but in that patch, you might want to consider this is a good time to say no, because your plate's full. And when your plate is full, you can manage it. When you overfill your plate, that's where overwhelm kicks in. And again, that's on you. Like, you actually have the power to say no in these situations.
Love it. Great. Now let's go into how to say no, because this is the art to be mastered. I heard some time ago that no is a complete sentence, and that is powerful. And most women go, yes, it's like amazing. But as a leader, and if you are trying to build your professional brand and you want to build great rapport and have great relationships with people, no probably isn't a full sentence, because you will take people offside. However, there are lots of ways to say no that are clear, that are direct, but you don't have to feel guilty for hurting the other people's feelings. So I'm not a believer in no as a complete sentence other than for a dog. I think it's worthwhile mastering this art, which is what this section of the podcast is about.
Well, I feel like, I think no as a complete sentence comes in really well with like physical autonomy and all that sort of stuff. Absolutely. Where it's like you are allowed to just say no. But when it comes to a workplace, and this is something I was just talking to Kristen about before this, is I've had a lot of people do it wrong to me.
Yeah.
And it really does impact your career, because when you have asked someone who reports to you or who is you've asked to help you out with something, and they either say, I'm too busy, or it's not in my job description, you're not looking kindly on them. I like, you have a lot of stuff on your plate. You need them to help with something. Yet, however, I've had some people do it really, really well. And I think the ingredients that I've found that work really nicely for a no is to give context. And so that's like, when may I be able to, could I get to it? Or this is actually what's already on my plate. So where does it fit in the priorities? That can be really helpful. And when you do that, you suddenly change this no from being almost passive aggressive, it comes across as, into a strategic no.
Well, and it's a dialogue as well, because if you're giving context, and I liked your comment earlier before the podcast, we were chatting about that emotive language. If I'm feeling really overwhelmed and I can't take this, again, isn't helpful. So if you to flip it to say, my plate is really full, here's all, can you help me prioritize so that I can work on this with you? That would be is it a priority compared to these things?
Yeah. Will it still be, in your meeting example, will this still be a priority in a month? Could we get onto it then? You're proactively confronting the issue at hand rather than just saying no, which really doesn't give the other person a lot to deal with. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but it really hasn't worked for me when people have said it badly.
Yeah, I think when I heard you say two different ways of saying it, one is a very closed conversation and they've stopped the conversation at no, because how can you combat with it's not in their job description?
Yeah.
There's nothing to come back with. You go, oh, well, the conversation's over. Whereas if it's a dialogue and the person is saying, here's what's going on on my workload at the moment, I would be curious to learn more with respect to priorities and strategic and how might this help me and can you help me? They're then being open to having the dialogue about what is it that needs to move, change, or whatever in order to accommodate that.
They're showing the ability to look at priorities and think strategically and come in with an open mind, which I think is amazing.
Correct.
So on that front, should we give some common examples of,
yes.
And actually the first one I think is one exception to what we just said,
yes, it is.
Which is are you kidding me? No?
This is where you're being asked to do non-promotable work. Predominantly women in the workplace end up being tasked with things like buying gifts, organizing social events, sitting on DEI committees, bringing in the food, organizing the retirement party. These are all non-promotable work, and we are massive advocates of women saying no in this instance in very diplomatic ways for two reasons. One, either make it promotable workplace. Like
Absolutely.
If you're sitting on a diversity and inclusion committee, that should be part of your job description. Or it should be recognized as part of your job, and it should be rewarded as such. Or if it's non-promotable work that feeds into the culture, very important stuff. How is that workplace spreading it out? Why is it always falling to women? So the are you kidding me no is recognizing that you are being asked to do something that there's very little value and it's taking you away from the things that are really valuable.
And I suppose that probably falls under the example you gave at the top about being given busy work as well, is how do you, so how would you navigate that situation now?
I'm really happy to play my part in building a great culture. Can we talk about how to allocate this type of work equitably across the group? I'm really busy this week. Could perhaps John take this on this week? Or can we have a discussion about how that works? Because these things tend to fall predominantly in HR/people places or marketing. People are like, oh, the marketing people will go run the retirement party because they're in events and they're whatever. So I don't know. I think
I agree. Yeah. And I think this is, we should put a link to the sharing the household load
yes.
Article as well, because this falls to me very similar, is that each of these tasks is actually multiple tasks. There's the mental load of knowing when to buy the gifts and whose birthday's coming up and who's leaving. Then there's the actual like organization and the project management of getting the money, asking for the whip around or whatever. Then there's the going out and buying it. Then there's the getting everyone to sign the card, whatever it is. There's actually multiple jobs in that. And if an organization is constantly just putting it on someone at the last minute, or it's just chucked at someone, that's actually very ineffective as well. So it's a really nice opportunity to open that conversation, or just say, oh, sorry, that like I've got a lot on my plate. Where does this fit in the priorities? Because it won't.
Well, it won't, but also I would hate for people to give up strategic work for doing something like that, particularly a woman. So I'd rather just have that as being really gracious. There's something really mature about being gracious, saying, look, I love being a part of this great culture and I benefit from it, but let's talk about how we might share this stuff around.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
and I think it is that part is always, I think both of us think it's a real shame that a lot of this work isn't seen as promotable, because I think, and we had this great conversation with these incredible women leaders the other day about caregiving as a leadership trait, and how actually that is so closely correlated but not always seen as that. And I think it's the same with culture. And there's an incredible woman I know who a while ago organized for her husband almost a funny employee of the week thing for someone who'd had the hardest week. And I was like, isn't that interesting? Because that would have been seen as like culture, but it's actually leadership. And I think if you actually see building a great culture for a knowledge economy company or organization, that is a critical element of a high performing team. Why is this stuff not? But anyway, that's a tangent for another day, but it's a good opportunity to show leadership through raising that conversation of, is this actually really valuable to us? I think it is. I think it's really, really critical. How are we going to either hire someone to do it or share it around in a way that's really productive?
Yeah, love it. The next one is called the grateful no. And this is this is kind of the classic, like you've been offered to do something, and this is kind of recognizing that it was important for someone to ask you to participate in this. So it's the thanks for thinking of me. It sounds really great. And then this is where you start to add the other things on, or I'd love to join you in this. This is where you kind of go, you can invite them into a conversation about how might we balance this. Or you could say, look, if you actually know it's not going to move a lot of needles for you, you could say, you just give them context about my plate is really full. I can't take on more responsibilities at this time, but I would love to be considered next time. So it's still just having that open dialogue.
I love it. I think the real consideration here is there's a fine line between valuable work and non-valuable work. And again, as a leader, if you have taken the opportunity, and I think you've had this before, where you've given someone the opportunity to step up and they've said, oh no, I'm too busy, doesn't work.
No.
It doesn't. You very much say, how are they not seeing this as a priority? So if there is an opportunity, like the example I had in my head is back at Kiwi Wealth Days, there'd often be these welcome events for new joiners, and we'd often all get asked to go participate, different people, and sometimes it was the next week and you didn't have the time, but you're like, I would love to go in a month's time to the next one. I can't make this one. That is a great, would be a great opportunity. If it's a one-off and it's strategic in any way and it's building a relationship with a sponsor, or it's showing that you like, I would be very careful to say no to stuff like that. Yeah,
absolutely. That could be the one where you go, ooh, you might actually, if that person's not your direct manager, you might have to go to direct manager and say, you know how my goal is this by this year. Yeah. I've been given this opportunity to do this. I'd love your support in this. Can we figure out how I can make this happen?
Absolutely. And that's what we put in the newsletter this week, is the retrospective no, where you actually go back to your manager and say, I might have to retrospectively say no to some other stuff on my list because this new priorities come in. Can I delay? Can I pass it off to someone else? Let's relook at the juggle and figure out what works.
And I think there's a real sense of, in all of our conversations here, there's a sense of honesty. I think it is actually okay to be honest about what's going on in your life. Not necessarily your emotive feelings, you're burning out or you're this or you're that. Sometimes people don't know how to deal with those emotions. So there's something about an honesty of the context of the situation. But then I also like, even for social things, and you've been caught in this trap before, not knowing honestly how to say no to a social invite, and you've made up another thing, or
I've actually gotten so much better. That was my goal last year, and I started being honest, and it was fascinating, the response. And I would just say, even if it was the day of, which I'm not normally a canceller, I'm not your classic canceller, but I would say I'm actually feeling completely wiped out. I've had like a day of meetings. I'm not going to bring my best self tonight, and I would rather actually delay and see you in the weekend and do it right. And I was fascinated by how almost without exception people were like, thank you so much for being honest,
and giving context.
And so I think that works as well. And again, work and life cross over here, and if you're overwhelmed out of work and you have too much on your plate, saying no to some of those things might give you a little bit more in work, a bit of time.
I agree. And then we end up with the not now no. And this is not a direct refusal. It's offering an alternative solution that works within your boundaries. So this could be being asked to do something at the end of the day, or it could be asked to do something that has a very tight deadline, but you're going away for a long planned weekend and you don't want to work on the weekend. Whatever your boundaries might be, those are up to you. But this is offering an alternative to what is being offered. So you could just say, this feels like a lower priority than this, but more urgent than this. If you agree, I can get onto that work right after this work, and or it could be, I'll be in touch after I log in tomorrow. Let's discuss more. I think it's not saying no, it's going, there's something here. Let's work through this. I just can't do it right now.
I agree. And I think, like everything, my belief very strongly is that the no's actually happen well before the conversation. And I think if, for example, you are thrown work at the last minute, which we've actually heard about a bit from the Powrsuit community recently, is like, my manager has just thrown, like, I'm pretty sure they've had it for a while, but they've given it to me a day before it's due. You don't always have the opportunity to say no in the moment, but what you do have the opportunity to do is afterwards, when you're in a one-on-one, when you're having a meeting, is raise it and say, my expectation is that if I have these priorities, that I need at least a week to work on this. How do we better hand over work and make sure that I have plenty of time to work on it? Same goes for that last minute thing. I think we all have this, right? You stand up to leave for the day and suddenly you're inundated with people needing stuff. And one of the things I've learned in my life is setting boundaries easy, enforcing them very hard. And that is the work where you stand up to leave, you get people coming over to ask you to do stuff, and you just reassert it and just say, as per usual, as per every day, I have to leave at 5 or at 3. I have to go pick up the kids. I'll get back to it. I'll take a look at it tomorrow, firmly and politely. But this is the time where you actually teach people how to treat you you've told them in advance so they know what to expect. A lot of people, I think the 7 out of the 8 responses to setting a boundary are trying to stop you from keeping that boundary. So reasserting it, and you are allowed to do that, especially if everyone's agreed. But I think the really key point for the end of all the no's is make sure you're having these conversations in advance, because it's often the worst time in the moment to have them. And
because you go to emotion, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. And I think when we're thinking about sharing the load of office culture stuff, of having things happen at the last minute, these are conversations we should be having in team meetings and one-on-ones well in advance. It's a symptom of a bigger problem if you're having to say it in the moment, but it's often a good kickstart to then have that conversation afterwards.
I love it. And so hopefully that has been helpful. Our challenge in our newsletter this week was just to say no to something this week. And we'd love to hear what you did say no to. So again, we're going to offer that challenge up here to our listeners, is if you're presented with something that won't move you closer to your goals, that feels that you're too busy, that you can't take on, have an open conversation, give context, be honest, come to a solution or offer up a solution, and will you let us know how that goes? Just more, again, practice makes perfect. You are also listening to our podcast right now, where you can follow us, you can give us 5 stars, and go onto our website as well and subscribe to our newsletter, because we'd love to be able to slide into your inbox and give you a little pep talk every week.
We would.
Yeah. Lovely chatting. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.